I mean, here's the thing: we focus a lot on how do we prevent the breach, or what do we do? Let's call it left of boom.
Mhm.
But what we do right of boom is just as important, right? I
Yeah.
mean, how you respond is absolutely critical. We talked about some places when people get breached, hey, it's a resume generating event.
Yeah.
But yeah, here's the thing: if I was a CISO, I'd be talking about, hey, these people just went through the most expensive training money can buy.
Mhm.
Why am I going to fire them when I can use this knowledge to make this place more secure? Same deal with how do you recover from a password breach? I mean, you know, if you just rotate your passwords once and call her a day, have you really fully recovered? Unless you get into, hey, we've changed our processes and the way we operate to make sure
Mhm.
these get rotated again routinely. You'll There's no such thing as a failed pen test, for example.
Yeah.
The only failed pen test is one where you don't learn.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of 401 Access Denied. I'm your host for today's podcast. I'm Joseph Carson, Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO at Delinea. And I'm really excited. Welcome back to another awesome, amazing guest. So this guest has been on previously and has been one of our top-rated podcasts to date. So it's great to welcome back Dustin Evil Mog. Welcome to the show. Can you tell us, for the audience, a little bit about who you are, what you do, and some of your things that you love to break and have fun with?
Yeah, not a problem. So, hi, I'm Evil Mog, otherwise known as Dustin Haywood. I am now the Chief Architect of X-Force and Senior Technical Staff Member at IBM X-Force. So that covers Red and IR. I'm also known for my exploits on Team Hashcat, where I'm known as Evil Mog. We've won Crack Me If You Can for a number of years and come in second for others. I collect black badges as a habit. Yeah, I'm black badge to DEF CON, DerbyCon, rest in peace, as well as a few others like Chicago's ThoughtCon, etc. And I do a lot of password security research, as well as Windows Active Directory, and now lately weird Telnet security research.
Awesome. Is the Church of Wi-Fi making a comeback this year?
We are absolutely making a comeback this year. I'm actually performing Renderman's wedding down
Whoa.
the weekend before DEF CON in the full ancient Church of Wi-Fi tradition. So that should be unique.
So for anyone who's going to a Black Hat and DEF CON, that's definitely going to be an entertaining show this year for DEF CON 30. I guess it's going to be a big one for everyone.
Yeah, I'm also running a contest at DEF CON this year again because I also run the DEF CON MUD. So for those who don't know what a MUD is, this is going back into the 90s. MUDs were text-based games that were the precursors to all modern, massively multiplayer online RPGs. So this is the text-based versions of it. We're bringing back a new and far more evil one again. And because it's a sanctioned DEF CON contest, I usually give away like a DEF CON ticket to the next year.
Awesome. So how many black badges do you have now? Is it 2 or 3? 3?
Four.
4. Okay.
So my
Whoa.
first one was to SkyDogCon, which was a
Yeah.
little conference out of Tennessee. It no longer
Mhm.
exists. This actually started the Black Badge curse.
Yeah.
My second one was to DerbyCon because I got awarded DerbyCon 8.
Mhm.
DerbyCon cancels DerbyCon 9. I won my DEF CON Black Badge at Hacker Jeopardy the
Yeah,
year before the
I was there.
pandemic hit.
I
Oh yeah,
was
you
there.
were there for
I was
that.
there for that one. Absolutely.
Yeah, so we won that one. Then DEF CON ends the next year because of the pandemic, so it got canceled. So the joke is every time I get a black badge, the conference gets canceled.
It ends.
Yeah.
So
Then I bought one for Chicago's ThoughtCon at one of their auctions, so I could help get them deal with some of their pandemic expenses.
okay.
And then we won one at Hacker Jeopardy, and so I gave the one I bought over to one of our members and kept the one that I earned. So I mean, you want to call it 4.5, 5?
That's pretty impressive. For many, getting one is a lifetime achievement. So that's a round of applause. That's definitely amazing achievement. Can you tell the audience, how did you get into password cracking and cracking passwords in the first place? What was the thing that brought you into that journey?
That was entirely accidental. So what happened was I used to be a network engineer. Of course, because I'm in Canada, I can't say I'm an engineer. I was a network technician over in Afghanistan, hooking up comm towers as a civilian contractor. I came home and then I got a job. Someone took a chance on me as a security analyst. So I was working at a government-owned bank. And we had to go start doing Active Directory password audits because people were reusing passwords. And so we started doing this on a weekly basis. And then I'm like, I need to get some more power. So Hashcat was just in the pre-alpha stages. You needed like a beta key to use it back in
Yeah.
2010, 2011. So I got involved in the IRC channels, etc. And we got invited to go help out with Crack Me If You Can because I was good at analyzing patterns. And then eventually we started building a large GPU farm at the last company, and we got involved in everything from Drown to a number of academic papers, and then we just kept bringing larger and larger amounts of hardware. And then that's actually how X-Force stole me, is they needed the password guy, and I got poached, and it's been bliss ever since.
That's awesome. So I mean, many of us in this field, we kind of fall into the areas, mostly because of we kind of focus on a specific area that we enjoyed, and we just basically get embraced into it, and all of a sudden, that becomes definitely the expertise area, and it's a lot of fun as well. So, question: What when you get into this, I mean, what's some of the things, the shocking things that you see in the state of passwords today? I mean, what's the challenges? What mistakes do we commonly find? How attackers been successful? What's let's say the top 5 mistakes that people make.
I want to say the biggest one is reused passwords. And this has been the same problem since the 70s. I mean, the password really is just a shared secret. There's nothing special about it. It's just something a human can type in. The thing is, we as humans are incredibly intelligent people, but our long-term memory and even our short-term memory sometimes can be a little shoddy, especially when you're trying to remember a long sequence of strings. I'm not going to remember 400 different passwords. The problem is, in order to stay secure, I need 400 different passwords on every single site. Yeah, so you got some options. What do we do with this? We can write them down, we can use password managers, or we can reuse the same password between environments. The biggest thing with passwords, though, and I would hate to bag on Microsoft, but I'm going to for this moment, and I apologize sincerely. Windows passwords, predominantly in a desktop and server environment, are based off of a protocol called NTLM. NTLM is basically MD4, which was, quote, broken back in the 80s. It is the fastest password to crack on GPUs, but that's not the problem with it. The problem is, in Windows, password hashes like NTLM, not V2 or V1 or Kerberos or whatever else, but straight NTLM, are password equivalent. So even if you have a 128 character password, the second somebody like a storage admin leaves or a Windows AD admin leaves, or there's a breach or there's a pen test, that secret becomes known. And that secret can be reused as if it was the password, so they have to get rotated. Now, obviously, NIST special instructions state we shouldn't be rotating passwords, which is great for things like your password manager. If you can have a really good, strong, complex password with multi-factor authentication on your password manager, that's perfect guidance. But people say we shouldn't be rotating passwords because of NIST, because most end users or even sysadmins, like myself, get lazy. We use a variant of the same password. The only good secure password, to be honest, is one that's randomly generated and looks like line noise. The other issue we've got is length. Now, because of this, say you're brute forcing a password. I can go randomly guess an 8-character password that a human generated thanks to the 3 of 4 rule. The 3 of 4 rule, which is basically you have to select a digit, a uppercase, a lowercase, or a special, and have 3 of those 4, actually allows us to reduce the search space a fair bit, especially on an 8-character password in Windows. A standard GPU or like a 3080 or a bank of 16 GTX 1080s can brute force an 8-character password in less than 8 hours. So at this point, an 8-character password is effectively dead. A 12-character password will take you brute forced, let's call it 34,000 years, assuming it's randomly generated and looks like line noise. Roll your face across the keyboard a little bit, and you should be okay. The problem with this whole process, though, is most users will select something like summer 2021. Or 2022 now, sorry, or spring 2022. It fits within the range. These passwords are easily crackable, and those things will rotate. So the only truly properly good password will be one that's randomly generated. If you have a random 12-character password with special characters and everything else, the sun will go out before I randomly guess it, unless I'm really lucky. And being as I haven't won the lotto and retired yet, I mean, good luck. So that's the real big issues we're seeing with passwords. But say we advance upwards to
Mhm.
modern Ubuntu, just as an example, or most modern Linux, they use salted SHA-512
Mhm.
crypt, which is massively iterated. Trying to brute force one of those will take you a million years at 12 characters.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm saying. 12 characters is roughly about the correct length for a password, as long as
Yeah.
it's randomly generated. If it's not randomly generated,
If you're
it's
leaving it, if we're leaving it to humans to decide on what the
yeah,
password is, we do things that are make us remember, and that's the thing is that when we're looking for something to remember, we'll use something that's easy to remember. And one of the things as well is that when you're looking, to create your rules and masks and try to get an idea of how to reduce that rule set or that word list down, what I end up doing is looking at that person's history of password choices because you can find it. Most of the people on this earth have already been the victim of basically password disclosures, either being in the hash format or being in the clear text. So having already had your previous password kind of decisions and choices exposed means an attacker can simply take that as the base and start creating variations of that. And it's very, it's very common that people will take that same path, just like I said, spring, summer, winter, 2022, add an exclamation to the end of it, and you're done. And we know that that's the trends and the habits. So, absolutely, moving humans should not be creating passwords. They should be creating passphrases, not passphrase. Plus, a multi-factor should be what's protecting the password manager, and the password manager is doing all the randomly generated credentials for everything else. And that means that the difficulty on an attacker being successful significantly reduces.
oh, absolutely. And I think what companies should be doing, yeah, I know this is also aimed at some consumers, but
Mhm.
companies especially should be issuing employees smart devices that are out of band from your typical Windows. And the reason
Mhm.
for that is your smart device has things like device attestation keys. You can find out if it's been
Mhm.
rooted. There is secure elements that you can store your password managers in. Like a mobile device is far more hardened, or can be far more hardened, not in all cases, but in most cases can be far more hardened than your typical PC. So say, a company pays $800 plus, $40 a month for all their employees, and then they provide them with a password manager. That's a huge step up in security for what I'd argue be a cheap investment compared to the cost of a breach.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, and this one of the things as well. I think organizations should look beyond just their employees and really kind of look into your suppliers, into your contractors. And one thing I remember years ago, one of the organizations that I was contracting consulting for, and it really changed my mindset when they realized that security starts with your social network around you. So why not even get your employees' families using it?
Hmm.
Reward them. That become a reward. It becomes loyalty. They see that you're not just taking care of the company, but you're actually extending security to the social sphere, to their family, so that their family and kids can even extend to using password managers and reduce the threats that it is. Because attackers will actually target them first as stepping stones to get into your organization. So why not extend your perimeter to the social sphere around the organization, your supplier, your contracts, your partners, your customers, and everybody. I think businesses now that's actually going to implement login kind of systems to their websites or to their applications. Password managers should be something you should be looking to integrate into as part of that default implementation. Moving away, I hate the term security by design because security by design doesn't necessarily mean it's unused. I
Yeah.
want to get to security. One of the CISOs I remember having a roundtable last year. They said the term it needs to be security by default, and that's what we should actually strive to get to. And I think that's one of the important things is when we're looking at implementing these, it should it should be on by default.
Well, it
There
should
should
also
be
be more just on by default, right? It should be on and usable by
yes,
default. It's just the thing.
absolutely.
Every time we implement a security control, if it slows things down and adds friction,
Mhm.
people are going to bypass it.
Yeah, they're
We as
gonna write it
security
down.
engineers, yeah, they're going to write it down. We need to understand that we are here to enable the business. The brakes on a
Mhm.
race car aren't there to make it go slower, they're there to make it go faster.
Yeah.
If you make things easy, people will comply. If you make things hard, they're going to work around it, just like people stick webcams pointing at multi-factor authentication tokens so they can go sign in if they forget it back at the bar
They take
or their
pictures,
house or
take
whatever.
photos of
Yeah.
the password so they can remember. Absolutely, you can run. I mean, when I look back on a lot of the breaches that I basically was investigating, and looking at, you find in the desktop clear text files, passwords sitting in them. You go into one thing, even in browsers, everyone goes to their browser and the browser loves to ask you for your credentials to save them. But again, by default, the browser has security turned off. You go to the password tab in the browser and all the passwords are there for basically, for taking.
Oh, yeah, and
Um,
there's Mimikatz modules to go extract that straight out of your browser. I mean, that's one thing red teams love to do this on.
yeah,
Versus a password manager is far more secure. And I'm glad you brought up the whole, companies should give password managers out to employees. Big Blue does that for every single employee. We have
yeah,
an option for our entire family to be covered by an enterprise password manager that is separate from our work password
mhm,
manager. So we can wipe the work one and they
and
transfer the
continue.
personal one over,
Yeah,
even if they separate from the company. So it's
yeah.
a huge win.
Yep. No, I think making it portable, making something because you want security to continue with that person's journey for the rest of their life. You don't want to,
Hmm.
all of a sudden, take security away from the person, they become vulnerable. So it'd be something we should embrace. And it makes, for me, that's the organization's giving back to society as well as a greater kind of is bringing security up. What's some of your favorite tools? I mean, there's lots of password cracking tools out there. There's lots of tools. Some of my favorites, like Cool or Hashcat, John the Ripper. What's some of your favorite tools that you enjoy using?
Wordsmith 2 by Sanjeev Kawa, who's now actually an X-Force Red employee, is one of my favorite tools. What it does is you go through and it says, pull me down the word lists from all of this particular region, or here's the geographic specific ones for, say,
Ah,
Estonia, Calgary, here's the one for Chicago. And then you use that with, say, targeted rules. Oh, it is so deadly.
that's pretty. That's cool. That's actually to did because absolutely because one of the things I used to see in Estonia was a lot of the typical brute force or cracking would not work because of the character set that Estonia uses. And if you're able to take that and customize it down and use that as your base word list that for commonly used credentials from that region, that definitely significantly reduces your potential word list down and also your success possibility. That's pretty cool. I'll have to check it out. It's one I've still been using, Pipeol and Cool and others that create the word list, but I haven't checked it out yet. So it's definitely one of the things I'll be looking in my free time next week.
Yeah, and it's an older tool. I mean, last
Yep.
release was about 2019 or so, but it's still been highly effective.
Hmm.
Other than that, there's a couple of standard, word list rules. I'm still, I've got a couple of rules in Hashcat's default, like generated two dot rule that was all done by machine. It's still effective.
Hmm.
Biggest thing though is word list and attack management. The rest of the tools like MDX Find, John the
Hmm.
Ripper, Hashcat, etc. They're all fairly effective. My favorite tool is one I wrote myself because obviously I'm
Okay.
biased. Um,
And you're
there's a
allowed to
tool.
be.
I'm allowed to be, yeah. There's a tool called the NTLM V1 multi-tool. And it's based on research from Moxie Marlin Spike back in the day, whereby NTLM version 1 effectively takes an NTLM hash and then uses it as the key for generating your NTLM V1. So what we can do is you can reverse that using a known ciphertext or a known plaintext attack using Desmode 14,000. It'll output, here's the hashcat specific format for reversing that to an NTLM, or it'll also output the crack.sh capability, so you can use their FPGAs. And so you can if NTLM version 1's turned on or MSChap v2,
Mhm.
those are basically instantly reversible now these days with some magical hashcat shenanigans. So those protocols should probably be deprecated sometime soon. Even if the password's 128 characters, it'll reverse it to an NTLM that can just be passed.
Okay, so 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 it automatically makes it weaker in the
Oh
result.
yeah. Well, the nice part is the attack path looks something like this. Say you run Petit Potam or Print Spooler against a domain controller, you get an NTLM version 1 response back for the computer's machine hash. You then turn that into an NTLM hash, sign yourself a Kerberos silver ticket, DC sync, you've popped the DC. Total runtime 15 minutes.
So for a warning for anyone who's actually using that technique today, that's probably a warning that you probably should revisit it and consider changing it. A question: what for different types of password cracking? From doing the traditional type of NTLM or network NTLM to SSH keys, and also to, for example, different hashes. Whether it being documents or browser database key databases. What different techniques do you use? Do you use the same technique for all of them, or do you try to augment your technique based on the type of hash that you're trying to crack?
Well, obviously, you're gonna have to change your technique depending on the hash. I split my techniques into three major categories. So there's really slow hashes, such as your bcrypts. Those you're using basic word lists, very few modification rules. If you're only doing 1,000 hashes per second on a GTX 1080, you're not really getting much out of those. We do a lot of CPU type stuff on those in order to get things to go faster. Like the IBM power systems are great for those. Yeah, not to advertise or anything like that, but yeah, when you've got that much horsepower on a Power 10, oh, it's gorgeous. But for a medium hash like a Kerberos Mode 13100 or the TGS Type 18s, those I'm using, best 64 with smaller word lists, or smaller word lists, or with larger word lists rather, and then smaller word lists with a bunch of advanced rules targeting specific information such as wordsmith to cool, etc. With faster hashes, I call it the excrement against the vertical air displacement device method, which is basically you just throw whatever you can at it randomly, and it's all about diffusion effectively. I'm trying to spray as much of that password space as possible. So I'll do things like use attack mode A1 with left side and a right side, using expander and cut B. I will use Prince Processor in a technique known as Purple Rain, where basically you take a word list like Rock You pipe it through Shuffle, you pipe it through Prince Processor 16, you pipe that into, or Prince Processor, and you pipe that into Hashcat, and then you give it 100,000 generated rules and just sit there, see what happens. You turn on debug mode, capture what works, then you use those in yet another attack, and you start this grind. That'll get you to 50, 60% faster than using most generated word lists. I'll also pipe in like long collections of previously cracked passwords, like CrackStation Human Only, HashMob, hashes.org, those kind of word lists. Or I'll just go randomly generate things. Like I've got a set of rules that are designed to crush a GPU. It's about a gig of rules. You would never want to use this normally unless you're running out of stuff or you're trying to break in a new cluster. But it's really good at finding faults in your build, especially when you're using, like, say, generation or ×1 PCI Express extenders as opposed to the full bus, etc. So there's techniques like that that get really aggressive. I'll brute force up to 8 characters now on NTLM because I can. I never thought I'd be saying this. 10 years ago, that was unheard of.
So, also, what techniques are gone? Old techniques such as rainbow tables used to use.
Rainbow tables are still used, but they're not used in everything. Rainbow tables are very algorithm specific. Like if I see Landman, I'm still pulling out rainbow tables, although Hashcat's now faster for those kind of attacks. There's a rainbow table for DES key cracking. That's what you use in the NTLM version 1 reversion to NTLM. So we'll still use those on large banks of FPGAs, but otherwise rainbow tables have kind of gone the way of the dinosaur. Word lists are kind of king, especially with proper intelligent password cracking rules. Straight up brute force isn't used as much as most people would think. So those tables that people say, here's time to brute force a character password, take those with a grain of salt. People love to put them up and rant about them every year. But a large number of those are based off of here's 440 V100s in a cluster that will cost you $10,000 an hour on cloud. I mean, people are spending that kind of money if they've stolen a bunch of money, but you're more concerned with your average hobbyist with 16 GTX 3080s sitting in their basement. That used to be a Bitcoin mining rig. So
they're going to repurpose the password cracking.
Exactly. Speaking of, your Bitcoin mining rigs or your cryptocurrency rigs do not make decent hash crackers, but hash crackers do make decent mining rigs. And the reason for that is mining rigs that take certain shortcuts that work great for blockchain, but the way Hashcat stresses a GPU, you will set your house on fire if you're using some of those techniques. We've seen fires caused because of shoddy components, the little ribbon extension cables, stuff like that tend to cause fires. And then also Hashcat, when you put like 4 rigs on a house on, say, 110 volt, you're gonna exceed your amperage rating in the house.
So what I mean, for anyone looking to get into specializing in passwords and cracking and becoming an expert into pen testing and helping organizations find the best way to protect, what type of hardware do they need to kind of really get themselves either get started or at least look to get into professionally, what's the hardware baseline somebody would?
The baseline I would consider as normal is any of your modern gaming GPUs. Like I run an old GTX 1080 still at the house because I haven't upgraded my gear, mostly because I use cloud. A lot of people are using like the GTX 3060s, 3070s, 3080s. You can do a lot of damage with just one of those cards. The key is make sure you understand the power. One of those systems, fully spec'd out, is going to draw about 1200 watts. And then by the time you count in conversion losses, etc., if you're using, say, a bronze-based supply, you're looking at about, let's call it 9-10 amps from the wall. And your average house, they say it's a 15 amp circuit, but there's also efficiency losses going out to the panel. So you can easily hit 15 amps and start breaking breakers if you go much beyond that range, if you have other stuff on that circuit. So make sure your run from your panel to your password cracking rig is appropriate for your job, and then make sure you've got appropriate cooling. But beyond that, you should be pretty much good to go. Nice part about Hashcat is you can detune it a little bit to use less power. Just don't say, hey, look, if your cooling's not sufficient, your power's not sufficient, don't complain about your hash rates. Split them up or start using some cloud, although cloud's expensive.
Do some optimization and find out what your rig's capable of, and make sure you don't exceed the limits. Set some limits when actually going to find out what your capabilities are from the hardware. Understand them, and then make sure you don't exceed them. Because I've seen
airflow is life is the other thing. You need adequate airflow. I mean, a lot of people do cracking on these little Intel NUCs or these little small board computers or mini ITXs. Those work absolutely fine. Just don't stick it in like your home theater cabinet with no airflow. A hash cracking job at full load will probably push you about 82 Celsius at the card, and internal case temps get really, really high. You don't really want it to exceed much beyond 85, 90-ish. I mean, I've seen some cards hit 110 like the older AMDs, and that's just a recipe for, oh my God.
So is liquid cooling an effective better than airflow?
It is. Liquid cooling, if you have the case room, is more effective. That being said, in a corporate world, liquid cooling adds points of failure. And when you take one card, it's okay, but when you times it by 32 cards, you need to move to enterprise liquid cooling solutions, such as engineered fluids, immersion cooling, those kind of techniques. Unless you have a really good hands and feet arrangement and you want people to come, and you can get people to come in to swap out video cards, it's not going to be a nice solution. So that's why a lot of enterprises go to air cool. I mean, IBM uses liquid cooling on our mainframes, and it's just gorgeous, but it's an engineered solution.
Okay, it's very, very specific for that system itself. So, question: when we met the last time, and we had a lot of discussions around the future side of things, where things are going, and I have to put my hands up to one thing. We've had a lot of discussions. We talked about biometrics getting kind of effective at I will say biometrics replace usernames, not passwords, but they have better security attributes. There's one thing I remember. Even we talked a lot about passwordless. And I think, I was always referring to is that, I don't see passwords going away, and passwordless doesn't really change the password. I do have to correct myself in that area, because I did have it was a really interesting discussion with another counterpart who's been working in moving more to passwordless. My kind of mention is that it's not the passwords are not going away, it's that secrets are not going away. There's going to be always a secret. And it just comes into the definition or what we are referring to, what is a password, because I always refer to as a password as a deviation of a secret itself. But yes, passwords are changing in how we interact with them. But at the end, there's some type of secret exchange that's happening in the background. So I just have to clarify. I was always saying that it was a password or a key, but just to get into the right terminology, there is some type of secret, and that secret is either dynamic or static, depending on the type of algorithm or system's been used. So that person did correct me, and it was actually really great because it was a very in-depth conversation. So what's your views on where's the future going with passwords?
I strongly agree with this, to be honest. We've been experimenting. Let's look at SSH, for example. We evolved from the password to the SSH public key. And now there's new techniques such as SSH certificates, which are completely different from X.509. So what we're seeing now is companies are tying in a short-lived certificate generator that's tied into, say, OpenID Connect or SAML-based authentication, multi-factor authentication on the back end based on everything from your IP, your telemetry information, all the way to your MFA answers to your geolocation. All these things get combined into a risk, and they make real-time risk decisions. If you pass all the risk decisions, so let's say risk-based authentication, they issue you a short-lived certificate that's valid for logging on to SSH. Now there's things with Windows where they're tying into Windows Hello, where they can issue you a short-lived certificate to log into Windows. And then the machine certificate is randomly generated in the back end. So this is the essence of when people talk about passwordless, what they're really talking about is shifting to more machine-managed secrets with risk-based authentication of the end user. And I'm all for it. This is turning into beautiful things like password managers, short-lived certificates, short-lived authentication, QR code-based authentication by taking your phone, scanning a QR code, signing in out of band. These are all the things that were actually forecast back in the 70s with things like trusted computing and hardware devices and trusted path. It's just we've evolved the technology to be actually end user friendly now.
And usable. I mean, that's the great thing is that it really, because I will say that it's moving, I always say it was moving passwords into the background. It's really moving secrets into the background. And as you're pointing out, is that we're really making, now that becomes much more possible to make context-based security decisions based on many different factors, that actually removes that decision-making, as solely on the user, solely on the person that's interacting. So we're making it less interactive. That experience is much improved, but there's a lot more sophistication and complexity in the background that has to be also done correctly. I've seen bad implementations of it where it still becomes a static password that never gets changed. And all of a sudden, that's what's been unlocked. And if you capture that in the network, you can basically expose that and abuse it. So to your point, what you described is, for me, is one of the ideal scenarios. If it's basically short-lived certificates, it's dynamically created based on the security context at that time, with other additional security factors, multi-factor. How long was the last time you signed into? What location you're signing in from? Is this machine known? Does it meet the security requirements in order to access this system? Is the system you're accessing highly sensitive, and therefore maybe you require different types of additional access workflows? Like, I need my colleague to approve this for me to access.
Yeah, the whole 4 eyes process as opposed to 2. Yeah. And I'm kind of glad you brought up the whole static secrets piece as well. I hate to bag on NIST again, but I'm going to get back into this. I got into a debate on Twitter the other day about how I greatly dislike this special instruction. And the reason for that isn't that, I don't believe end users shouldn't have to rotate their certificates to their password manager. However, secrets in general do need to rotate. Just because, here's the thing, breaches happen, data get out there, secrets are only secret as long as nobody else knows them.
Exactly.
And in order to keep that, they have to be frequently rotated, but that process shouldn't be user-driven. It should be fully automatic. The user doesn't need to know, hey, I've got 400 passwords and they're all rotating, and here's my password list. They should be notified when the change fails.
Yes.
Same deal in the corporate world. A service account password should not live for more than, I want to say, a month. Right now, the current standard's a year for most places, or never. Like, they never change. How many companies changed their KRB TGT hash in the last 10 years?
Right? Unless they have to rebuild their Active Directory.
Or unless they got pen tested that showed up in a pen test format. And even then, half of them ignore changing it. So stuff like this.
They only do it once and forget that they need to do it twice, actually, to properly rotate it.
Yeah, so public service announcement, if you have an Active Directory domain, which is most of you, change your KRB TGT hash once every 6 months. This way, you're guaranteed to have it rotated twice at least within a year, and you won't break all your Kerberos tickets.
Yeah, and I think you brought up, because I think a few years ago when this brought out that recommendation to you don't have to rotate your passwords if you're using multi-factor authentication. I've got into arguments online about that with others as well. We've had disagreements into, I always say it's all about the risk that you're willing to accept. What's the risk you're willing to accept? If you have multi-factor authentication, and we have to remember, not all multi-factor authentication is the same. So,
and there's bypasses to it, right?
There's lots of backdoors, and where's people saving their backup keys or their MFA?
Oh yeah, for example,
on their phone.
So let's just say a popular enterprise password manager, so I'm not advertising for other folks, happens to give you the option to store your authentication secrets right in the password manager. So you go to your password manager, go to the ClickUp, and look, here's my MFA ready to rock. And it's like, okay, I mean, the whole point of MFA is to have my passwords stored on my cell phone separate from my password manager or wherever else they are. So I get the convenience factor and I'm all here for it, but the same token, I just kind of cringe a little bit.
De-risk is the most important thing. Is you don't want to keep all your eggs in one basket. Therefore, if whatever it is that's sensitive in your password manager and you're using multi-factor authentication, sometimes use another method of storing that. As you know, for me, I use multiple password managers for that specific purpose. I've got online and offline. I've got basically isolated and segregated systems. So to make sure, at least that if I ever need to, I can go to it, but I know that if one's compromised, it doesn't impact the other, and that's
Well,
one
and
of the
here's
key
the other
things.
thing. How many people also back up their authentication secrets, like via printing out a rescue kit? As what happens, say I have a house fire, as an example, and I
Yep.
lose my phone, I lose everything else, and I can't get into any of my systems. Now,
Mhm.
maybe I managed to get out with my wallet tops. Trying to get those reset, next to impossible, especially in this day and age. So make sure you go and you print off your backup options, store it in a
Yeah,
bank that's double guarded by guys with guns, so people can't get in and steal it, or
because
find something
it's
that works for you.
that's your digital life. If you lose access to it, and I mean, I've had people come to me and say they've had account takeovers, or their
Mhm.
social media account, which is critical to the business, is now all of a sudden stolen, and they don't no longer access to it, or the website domain that they were managing. The basically the people basically took it over, and they've no longer access to their entire website, and their user database is all in there. And even access to the banks and so forth. So you end up in a situation where you get these stolen accounts that you need to have ways to regain access to it. You need to have ways to be able to get back into those accounts. And if you don't have those systems, or you haven't implemented the restoration, that becomes really devastating for a lot of people. I've seen people lose their business as a result of not having that backup, those keys.
Well, here's the other thing. Say the untimely event. I take
Mm.
part in lots of extreme sports. So say I die.
Yeah.
How are people going to get into things like my financials, stocks, etc.? I keep a emergency rescue kit with my will, and it gets updated routinely.
Yep.
Why? Because I want to go bequeath my massive iTunes collection out to my family, as an example. Like I spent a lot of money on that.
Yep, absolutely. And it's the same when you get into not only your music store, but also your movies. You could get into, as you mentioned, your stock options. Other types of things you maintain. I think one thing that I had a good experience recently, where I was actually a bit worried about it at the beginning, was actually migrating to a new mobile phone. And I remember in the past that was always, especially for someone like myself. I've got, like you, when we talk about the number of accounts that we have to manage, because we have different personas and different accounts and systems, and we sometimes go a little bit crazy. I think I've got, well over 500 different accounts that I have to manage with different passwords and credentials and different multi-factors for different things. And it came to getting a new phone, and I cringed at the idea of having to re-provision and move things across. But I actually found that today, a lot of the systems have actually made it much easier. There's a few things that I did have to get reset to move across, but the experience was a lot much easier than what it was maybe 3-4 years ago.
Oh yeah,
So
like my authenticator app got transferred over automatically. Like all of the secrets and everything
yeah,
just came on over, and I was shocked.
yeah, even that itself, because it used to be. I think one of the things in the past that always, I think for many organizations, especially when you talk about security, and if they're moving between security solutions, I remember one organization saying that it wasn't the security solution that they're worried about. It was the time basically when they had to uninstall it and the systems were not being protected. That was the fear. So some years ago in the past, when you wanted to move MFA across to another phone, you sometimes had to disable it basically, and then re-enable it on the new phone. And it's that time frame that's when basically you're most exposed, is when you have to go through those processes of disabling security in order to migrate it or transfer it or re-provision the new system.
Oh yeah,
And that
migrating
was
security solutions is the worst, right? I mean, remember when
yeah,
RSA got breached like back in
yeah,
2012 or so? We all had to go swap out of secure ID fobs on the new ones. I mean, they've improved since then, but it was just a nightmare. I mean, people had to go change the new hardware tokens, and imagine issuing out, say, 1,400 tokens
oh,
across your workspace.
it's the same. I mean, in Estonia, we've had the same experience. I mean, fortunately enough, through the years, Estonia's been quite, back. It was the first time we had the issue was back in 2008. Was we were heavily dependent on timestamping protocol within the browser, and in 2008. Google decided to end of life Chrome support for timestamping. And that meant that our ID cards that we use for literally everything in Estonia, from voting to banking to prescriptions to loyalty cards to even getting on the tram, it meant that in 2008 there was something like 50,000 cards that no longer worked with the Chrome browser. And that actually created a big issue. And it ended up meaning that in order to find ways in order to resolve that, it introduced this piece of software that you had installed on your computer that would actually regenerate the keys and apply a new protocol to the card. So it was great. That solved that small issue for those 50,000 cards, because, of course, we've got 1.3 million citizens who's using this system in the background. Fortunately enough, it was limited to only a set amount of people. But then fast forwarded to, I think it was 2017, 2018, when Estonia then decided that they were moving from their old legacy smart card systems to I think it was a Gemalto-based one. And about a year after those new cards were issued, what happened was they found that there was actually a flaw in the actually key module that they're using to generate the keys in those cards. And ended up meaning, I think it was 800,000 at that time that had been since issued. That meant that they were now vulnerable. And would have had to been, if they didn't have that system that they solved back in 2008 to fix the Chrome browser issue, that was the same system that, fortunately enough, had allowed them to regenerate the keys on the people's computers. And that actually saved them from having to go and reissue all of those cards. So sometimes, these systems are not always perfect. You do have bumps along the road, but it's how you're able to resolve the issue and how you make it usable for everybody, and how that experience is what basically is the decision between people continuing to adopt it and embrace it versus those who decide to change path and look for something else. So I think it's really important. We will always have these bumps in the road. We'll always have vulnerabilities in encryption. We'll always have challenges in migrating, and we'll always have systems and applications end of lifing some type of protocol. And we just have to find ways on how to make sure that we continue maintaining that standard of security as we move forward.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, right? I mean, here's the thing: we focus a lot on how do we prevent the breach, or what do we do? Let's call it left of boom.
Mhm.
But what we do right of boom is just as important, right? I mean, how you respond is absolutely critical. We talk about some places when people get breached, hey, it's a resume generating event, but here's the thing: if I was a CISO, I'd be talking about, hey, these people just went through the most expensive training money can buy.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I going to fire them when I can use this knowledge to make this place more secure? Same deal with how do you recover from a password breach? I mean, if you just rotate your passwords once and call it a day, have you really fully recovered? Unless you get into, hey, we've changed our processes and the way we operate to make sure these get rotated again routinely. There's no such thing as a failed pen test, for example. The only failed pen test is one where you don't learn.
Yeah, you don't change the from the lessons and experiences that you find and discover. And I think that's really
exactly.
I think that I think cyber insurance is important in this regards. I think cyber insurance does help organizations at least provide that financial support when they do become a victim or have an incident. But that should not be the dependent only thing that you do in a breach, part of a breach. Is that helps you support it financially, but you have to go and you have to find and discover how that initial foothold happened, how they get in, how they elevated credentials, and you have to go
and that's the thing. And it shouldn't be your company doing it, right? You should typically have an IR company on retainer, and the reason for that is lawyers and insurance companies love to see an independent third party do some of this. There's evidence preservation. There's a number of things that you can spoil real quick if you're doing this yourself.
And many organizations, one of my things that I've been kind of my motto I've been doing the last year and a half is that there's the difference between having an incident response plan, which is one thing. That means, okay, you went through and you got your checklist and it's sitting on a SharePoint, but there's a big difference between being incident response ready, and that's completely different. I mean, the last thing I want to be sitting in an incident response meeting is trying to agree on what time format we're going to be using for gathering images. What waste of time is that? It should have already been planned beforehand. Next thing, okay, where are we going to store these images? Well, we don't have enough space because all of a sudden, you need terabytes of data to store all of these images of victims' machines. And the last thing you want to be doing is now doing a same-day delivery on Amazon and hoping they get there in time that you can actually. That's that's the difference between having, one is having a plan, which sometimes gets encrypted with a ransomware on the SharePoint, and if you don't have an offline copy. But the next thing is having readiness. And that's why I always say it's important to have retainers with incident response experts who do this day in, day out, and who have the knowledge about how to make quick decisions and actually can quickly move along to where you actually get proper containment very quickly. Because
And there's also things like out-of-band communication, right? What happens
yeah,
if your VoIP system's been encrypted by the ransomware? How are you contacting people over compromised systems? Do you have backup solutions in place? Have you practiced these processes? Are
yeah.
they reasonably fresh? Or are you reaching through some locked file cabinet in Zurich somewhere trying to go find it and sending people on an international flight to go pick the thing up? Like,
Absolutely. I mean, I also even say that even the accounts. This is what gets into the access that your incident responders have on the systems as well to do the forensics evidence gathering, to look at the audit logs. The last thing you want to have is them using the same accounts which are compromised by the attackers, and all of a sudden now you're contaminating evidence. You're contaminating, the evidence, process as well, which potentially even puts you into a situation later where you cannot use it in a legal frame as well. So it's really important to make sure that with the incident responder, you've got accounts set up specifically for that purpose that have no previously contamination of
or
audit
a
logs.
process to create them rapidly, because who knows, those
Yep,
accounts could have already been compromised.
absolutely, and to create them and deploy them, and give them access to the systems they need to. Absolutely. So I think it's always crucial in incident response, especially for organizations, especially when it comes to credential compromise, how quickly you can rotate those credentials, how you can make sure that you can actually determine where they actually laterally moved to in the environment, what did they have access to, did it expand to cloud environments as well. One thing, that's a question I've got for yourself as well, is that now, a lot of times it's been basically isolated to a lot of on-premise. What do you see with the cloud side of things?
I
I've
mean,
seen. I was
cloud's
talking to
really
Carlos Pollock a few weeks ago, and he was talking about his Purple Panda, which is now doing, basically, privileged elevation escalation scripts for cloud environments. So what's happening on the cloud side?
I mean, cloud really is no different
Mhm.
from on-prem. I mean, it is different. I don't want to go say it's not, but a lot of the same processes still work. Create new accounts, isolate the systems, copy things over. Nice part about cloud is you can do cloud to a cloud account transfers.
Mhm.
So what we're doing at IR, for example, is we have a dedicated cloud account just for capturing those IR images, and you do a inside, let's use Amazon as an example, an inside Amazon to Amazon transfer, so you're not paying massive data
Mhm.
egress fees. Because say you're transferring from Amazon to IBM Cloud, you're going to be paying data egress fees out the nose.
Mhm.
Same deal with Azure's or whatever cloud providers are all out there. So really, it's as long as your incident response provider
Mhm.
has experience in cloud and a cloud plan, you're largely good to go. If you're large enough that you can do your own internal IR, then
Yeah.
obviously people are already building up contingencies ready to rock. I've seen everything as weird as sending an Amazon Snowball or whatever their big truck is out to the system, plugging it into the data center and driving it out to do the forensics, or driving out massive piles of trucks and getting the data shipped to them. So it just adds a little bit more logistics, but it's moving data around is the global economy, so
Yeah.
it's really no different, even though it is different.
No, absolutely agree. So, kind of want to get one final question in from you. So, and this is going back. This is the big question. Is passwords going to die? Are they going away, or is it we should refer to as secrets going away?
No, I will see
So
the secret evolving.
yeah,
It will
yeah,
never truly go away. And the reason for this is not all systems can be connected to the internet. In fact, not all
mhm,
systems should. Let's look at SCADA and OT as an
yeah,
example. Those systems, I'm not going to connect to a giant enterprise password manager. We're going to go manually rotate those secrets. You're going to need to authenticate those things while you're out at some power station or whatever else. Secrets aren't going away. We still need some way of exchanging data. How we access them, how they
mhm,
get managed will evolve, but they were an effective tool for the last, let's call it 50, 60 years or even longer, however long
mhm.
computers have been running. They're going to continue to be there. It's just how we access them, how we manage them will evolve.
Yeah, the experience, I think it's from the user experience is definitely evolving. But I agree with you. I think it's a lot of those systems. SCADA controls their lifespan. 7 to 20, 30 years. We're not going to be changing satellite stuff frequently. So I don't see a lot of those kind of more critical systems changing very fast. But yes, with the
I
human
think I'll
experience,
retire before they go away. Is what'll happen.
that's what it makes it. That's you and me both. That's it is. So, but Dustin Evil Mog, it's been awesome having you on the show, and I really always enjoy talking about password cracking and techniques, what's evolving, what's been changing. Any final thoughts or any words of wisdom for the audience?
If you don't have a password manager, please go out and get one. They've improved so much in usability over the last couple of years. I'm still trying to get people to go use them. That's going to be my mantra for the next 5-6 years. But get a password manager, get unique passwords between systems, back up your secrets somewhere safe in case there's an end to your digital life or some other major event. But just please get a password manager and make sure that your passwords are unique between systems.
Absolutely. Yep. Evil Mog, Dustin, it's been awesome having you on, and it's been a pleasure. It's great to have you back on again, and I'm pretty sure this will not be. You'll hopefully be on again in the future. We'll definitely.
Yeah, I don't think this will be the last.
It will not be. So for the audience, again, you've heard the latest updates and where passwords have been coming from and where they're going to, and hopefully this has been educational, enjoyable for you. Stay safe out there. Again, tune in. This is a 401 Access Denied podcast every 2 weeks, bringing you thought leadership, expertise, knowledge, and information sharing on the trends in the cybersecurity industry. So stay safe, take care, and thank you. Dustin, you've been awesome.
Thank you.